Good day, everyone. I'm David C. Santa Ana, and I will be your discussant on the topic Interpreting Data Gathered Through Testing Hypotheses. Before we start, let's have a short recap of the previous discussion. In the previous discussion, it was stated that interpretation of research findings were based on the researcher's attempt to describe numerical characteristics of their data with regard to the problem of the study. Now, we must always remember that as researchers, we must always be familiar with the basic statistical procedures to shed light and meanings to the findings. Let's start our discussion with the definition of hypothesis. So, what is hypothesis? A hypothesis is an assertion or a statement about a population. Data are gathered to check the validity of this claim. In practice, it is assumed that the population is so large that it is not feasible to collect all its elements and verify the hypothesis. In this light, we only use the available data, which is large enough to check the reasonableness of the statement. Another definition of hypothesis is that it is a prediction or a guess of the relation that exists among variables being investigated, according to Wonacott and Wonacott 1990. A hypothesis must be stated so that it is capable of being either refuted or confirmed. The result will answer relationships that exist among variables. Now, what is hypothesis testing? Statistical hypothesis testing is a procedure of dichotomizing the conflicting theories and test these statements based on the sample, evidence, and probability theory. At the end of this procedure, we can reject or do not reject the assumed true hypothesis. In general, any hypothesis that lies outside the confidence may be judged implausible, that is, it can be rejected. On the other hand, any hypothesis that lies within the confidence interval may be judged plausible or acceptable. In conforming to the tradition, we usually speak of testing at an error level of 5%. Now, let me present to you the five-step procedure for testing a hypothesis. Step number one, we have to state the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. This procedure always starts with giving the two mutually exhaustive hypotheses. The null hypothesis denoted by h of 0 and the alternative hypothesis denoted by h of 1. The null hypothesis is always assumed to be true before performing the test. On the other hand, the alternative hypothesis describes what you will conclude if you reject the null hypothesis. It is often called the research hypothesis since it is the alternative that researchers want to get. Step number two, select a level of significance. After establishing the null and alternative hypothesis, the next step is to choose the level of significance. To understand the notion of level of significance, a researcher may commit two possible errors in testing hypotheses. If the researcher rejects the null hypothesis, given that it is true, then he or she committed a type 1 error. On the other hand, if the researcher does not reject the null hypothesis, given that it is false, then he or she committed a type 2 error. Step number 3, select the appropriate test statistic. A test statistic is a value determined from sample information, and it is used to determine whether to reject the null hypothesis. Next, we have step number 4. This is the step in which we are going to formulate the decision rule. A decision rule is a statement of the specific conditions under which the null hypothesis is rejected and the conditions under which it is not rejected. The region or area of rejection define the location of all those values that are so large or so small that the probability of their occurrence under true null hypothesis is rather remote. And our last step is to make a decision. The fifth and final step is computing the value of the test statistic. Check whether its value is inside the rejection region and making a decision to reject or not reject the null hypothesis. In addition, the decision criteria for accepting or rejecting hypothesis is on the computed p-value or the significance value. The p-value summarizes clearly how much agreement there is between the data and null hypothesis. The p-value is an excellent way to summarize what data says about the credibility of the null hypothesis. Now, to better understand our topic on hypothesis testing, let's have this example. Now, let's take a look at the table and let's learn more about hypothesis testing. This table number 4 was taken from another research conducted by Dumrong 2013. And this is about the differences based on monthly income, extent of the quality of work life of administrators in the area, development of the ability of the individual. Now let us try to analyze the data presented in the table. As gleaned from the table, there is significant difference in the assessment between two groups of administrators who have monthly income of more than 10,000 baht per month and those who have less than or equal to 10,000 baht per month. On the variable development of the ability of the individual, the overall t-value of -1 and 5 tenths with the corresponding probability value of 22 thousandths is significant at alpha 500ths. This means that there are sufficient evidence to prove that the difference in monthly income among administrators with regards to quality of work life, development of the ability of the individual could vary. This may seem to indicate that the respondents with lower monthly income may have been in favor of the manner in which management of the school recognizes and rewards employees who have capabilities to do the job. So, in this study, the null hypothesis was stated that administrators, based on their monthly income, assessed differently the quality of work life, development of the ability of the individual. So, take note of the overall numerical data in the column with the heading t value. So, this is the column for t value and the column with p-value. So here is the column for p-value. It was red. The overall t-value or the t-test of -1 and 5 tenths with a computed p-value of 22 thousandths rejects the null hypothesis, indicating significant difference in the assessment of significance of two groups of respondents at 500ths level of significance. So, besides the statistical analysis, additional explanation on the findings was expressed by the researcher, where this means that there are sufficient evidence to prove that the difference in monthly income among administrators with regards to QWL's development of the ability of the individual could vary. So it showed enough data to reject the hypothesis. In addition to the interpretation of the findings, the researcher speculated further that this may seem to indicate that the respondents with lower monthly income may have been in favor of the manner in which management of the school recognizes and rewards employees who have capabilities to do the job. So this means that there are other information that the researcher could have explored and gave further meaning to the difference in the two groups' perceptions. By citing the confidence interval in a hypothesis testing, the finding is interpreted and given new meaning. So that ends my presentation. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening.